Welcome back to another episode of the Care2Listen podcast. In this episode, I am joined by healthcare professional Mikhail Nisenboym, who shares his story as an immigrant moving to Canada, talks about his mental health struggles while supporting a family, and the nuanced experience of being a man in a traditionally female-dominated healthcare industry. Today's episode is being broadcasted to you on the unceded and traditional territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh nations. Trigger warning. This podcast discusses topics that may be triggering for some viewers, including suicide, loss of a patient, and addiction. So hello and welcome back to another episode of the Care2Listen podcast. I'm joined today by special guest Mikhail Nisenboym. Welcome to the show, Mikhail.
Thank you for having me.
So today we're going to cover everything from your upbringing, your story, your transition, being a refugee, and then progressing into the healthcare industry, talking a little bit about what it's like to be a male in a female-dominated industry, as well as some of the other challenges that have grown up or have gotten by in your current life. So I'm curious, maybe just to start us off, could you maybe just introduce yourself and let the audience know a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, my name is Mikhail. I'm a healthcare professional, and I've been working in the long-term care for the last 16 years. I was born in Ukraine, which it was at that time was Soviet Union, to a Jewish family, and life was very difficult for Jews at that time. So my family tried to immigrate when I was 1 year old in 1979, because Soviet Union at that time was able to, they let only a certain amount of Jews out of the country at that time. But fortunately, my family missed that opportunity. So, and I grew up under the communist regime, and went through everything. You know, we always were second-class citizens living in that country. So the next opportunity came around in 1988, and at the time, my mother was divorced from my father. They got divorced when I was 6 years old, and the only people that I had in my life was my mother and my grandma and my grandmother's sister. So it was two old women, my mom and myself, and we decided that the life for us wasn't an option living in that place, and we. With a 5 or 6 bags to our name, we got on a bus and then we went on a long journey that took almost a year to get to the United States as refugees.
Yeah, I can imagine just being such a young guy at that age and not really knowing what that meant or the experience that you were about to begin and the journey you're about to embark on. What was that like, that transition, and how? From a mental health perspective, how did that show up when you started to settle in and live in the U.S.?
It was a very scary is not probably even the word to describe the feeling, being having absolutely nothing, because the Soviet Union at the time, when you leave the country, they stripped you of your citizenship. And you have nothing, and you don't know where you belong. You don't know where you're gonna end up. We always had a path to Israel, but my mom, I think one of the biggest reasons why they wanted to leave the country was because they did not want me to join the military, and there was an obligated 2-year service with the Soviet Union, and being a Jew was almost a death sentence. Going into something like that, because they put you in a not a very desirable place. So that was that's why she really wanted me out of there. And living, because the process was very long. It was I had to live in Vienna, Austria for about a few months, and then Italy we lived for close to a year, waiting to be finding out where we're going to end up, and just being by myself, feeling. Feeling like I needed to be a man, and I was the only man in my family that needed to protect and watch over my It was only me, my mom, and two older ladies, and just everything we had was in the bags. So it was very, it was a very difficult and scary experience that probably lasted forever with me. I think, lingers throughout my life.
Yeah, and hearing how just your approach to life now and understanding being a male in that female-dominated industry, do you feel like part of that experience growing up as a child has now translated into, giving you better awareness and being able to navigate some of those structures and what it might be like in a traditionally female-dominated industry?
Yeah, like I think growing up just with my mother and just and two older ladies and everything that I had to go through. Yeah, I think I am able to read better people. I'm able to kind of assess my situations a bit better. I think reading people is extremely important in my job, especially when you're dealing with somebody with mental health problems, but also just being there for your coworkers, right? Being able to comfort them, or just to if I'm there, that they feel more safer when we're dealing with a more dangerous or or stressful situation.
It helps that you're a pretty big guy here.
That helps. It works. It could be. I find that sometimes it can be a positive thing or a negative thing. I find that sometimes, it all depends on approach. Sometimes I can walk in a room and I can diffuse a situation just with my presence, and because just the way that a resident can respond to me being there, or sometimes I can walk into a situation in a room and make it worse. So it's just. You have to basically approach each situation differently and kind of assess.
So let's jump back then to that period of time. You immigrated to the U.S. How did you ultimately end up in the healthcare industry?
Well, the getting to healthcare took a long time, but I think in the end, like if I had to kind of quickly summarize it, would be. I did have to take care of my elderly grandmothers after my mom kind of went through a rough time, so she kind of abandoned me when I was at a very early age, and so I was kind of later in my life was having to take care of both elderly women with both ended up with dementia. The first time I experienced dementia was when my grandma, I call her grandma, but it was my grandmother's sister. She just one day just woke up and did not know who I was looking straight at me and didn't know who I was. It was very sudden. She looked at me and called me by a different name and looked around the house and did not realize where she was, and she was just storming out of the house and it doesn't matter what I said, like, no, I'm not home, I need to get home. And I remember having to call an ambulance, and we had to pretty much put her in the home at that time.
And being a healthcare professional yourself, and maybe not at this time, but having the understanding and the awareness of what dementia is and how it shows up with respect to your work, do you think that now having that understanding and awareness would have it helped you when you were personally experiencing a family member who was going through dementia?
Yeah, definitely with my experience now, it would have been a different approach. There's so many regrets, you have, I think a lot of even family members, they struggle with this on a daily basis, having to fight, kind of like guilt and things that they, putting their loved ones and surrendering the loved ones to a place like where I work. I think it's a very, very difficult thing for a lot of families to deal with, because I think it's very hard for families overall to just, it all depends on the severity of the illness and how far it progressed in a person's life. That it could be, it could be something from like my grandma, actually, my actual grandma, she did get the dementia later, but I was able to take care of her much longer before she had to go into a home, because it was just progressing at a much slower rate, and she just became a bit confused here and there, but I was able to help her more, and we didn't have to kind of give her up. But it's a process. I think that it's a very difficult thing to. But I see families constantly struggling with this.
And what do you think about, other coworkers? We talked a little bit about it today, whether it's working with patients who have dementia, and relating some of those experiences back to your personal experience, or, patients who consistently are passing away and dealing with death on a daily basis. What's that like, and what's the toll does that take on your personal mental health?
Oh, it's huge. The thing is, I think a lot of people don't realize that professions, a lot of people in going through their normal life do not experience death, like, on a daily basis or weekly basis. It happens, once in the, and it's devastating when it happens in your life. But we're expected to just basically, just move on. Somebody passes away, and it's weird sometimes when I look at my coworkers, how we all deal with it in our own little way. I was talking to my coworkers recently, and somebody kind of told me this, and it's not my own words, but they said that it's kind of being like a soldier on the battlefield. They find it like, they lose people that they care about, and they kind of have to keep on going. They kind of have to keep on fighting, and I never thought of that like that. But it affects you. It definitely affects you in your everyday life. You don't think it does. You think it's just something part of your job. But I don't think it's a normal human mechanism. That's not how we as people kind of deal with death normally. And I think we're just going to expect it just to move on, and we don't. I think we pretend that we do, but I think a lot of times it kind of, I think, manifests itself in different things, in our relationships, in our just how we deal with it at home.
Absolutely. And I know, you're somebody who has an amazing supportive wife, Tara, also in the healthcare industry. What do you guys do to process and work through some of that grief and loss that vicariously you're living through by having some of your patients who are passing away?
Well, it definitely helps to be able, to talk to someone that understands. Like, she understands completely. Not only she understands, she knows who I'm talking about, right? She knows how much that person affected my life. We all bond with our patients, but some of them more than others, right? Some people are extremely special into your life. They become like your grandparents, and they become somebody you love, and we both love that person so much that it was when they pass away, it's a devastating thing. And at work, we do try to kind of talk about things like that with our coworkers. We talk about the fun times we had with these people, and a lot of times we bring them up constantly, like, do you remember this person? But with someone that I live with, and my wife, we definitely, when I come home, when I'm bothered and stuff, that I can actually have that opportunity to talk. A lot of my coworkers don't have that opportunity. They come home and their husbands or their wives do not understand what they go through every day.
And if we jump back to your personal journey, your experience, you're somebody who I know has an immense amount of empathy and support and understanding for people who may be going through difficult times. From your journey perspective, how has that shown up for you in your life?
Well, in my journey, I have a few difficult things in my life that happened to me that I had to overcome. Part of it was when my mom, when we immigrated to New York, it was very, my mom, she was an engineer in Soviet Union, and then coming to New York, she needed to upgrade, and having no English and not having the skills needed to upgrade, she became a babysitter. And I think part of that, just she fell into a very deep depression and started drinking on a daily basis. She became a really bad alcoholic. I remember, because me and my mom, we left. I didn't live with my grandma. She wanted to live on her own. It was me and my mom, and she started drinking very heavily when I was about 13. And I can tell you that as a 13-year-old boy living in New York City, in Brooklyn, and having your mom drunk every single night, it was it was a devastating experience, just because you feel so vulnerable. that vulnerability, being like, if something happened right now, there was a fire, there was some kind of an emergency, like, what am I gonna do? Like, I have nobody else to there's nobody there to protect me. Like, I'm the adult in the room now.
Mm-hmm.
So that was a very scary experience. I remember having to, she would get drunk and she would usually kill a bottle every night, and I would have to, I would go and I would, if she didn't finish it, I would dump it down the toilet, just because it was a very scary thing. And she struggled with that, I think, until the end of her life.
And obviously having to, grow up much faster than, any other individual who, 11-year-old boy. I mean, I think you were basically being asked to be an adult, like, right away. And I can only imagine, the challenges that would have been. And, I think we're really lucky to have someone like yourself who has the wherewithal, who has gone through so many of these different experiences in life, and now has been able to build something for a family of 8 with 8 kids.
Yes.
Just casually throw that in there. And really make a significant difference in the lives of others. So what do you think, like, hearing a little bit about your upbringing and your story, why do you think you've turned out the way that you have, or you are?
I think I could have went both ways. I think, and I see it with many people, I think one way is you live this experience with your mother, and then some people give up, and then they kind of follow their parents' footsteps, and they do those things. And I think that fear that kept me from, like, I don't drink at all. Because of my mom, I never been drunk in my life. I never did any substance abuse in my life, because that fear, I think, kind of, and having to be responsible, having to be, like I said, adult in the room at a very young age, kind of gave me that focus that I needed, And now I see my children, I can imagine my children being in a situation that I was, and I never wanted that for them, so I think that's part of it. Even like I said, sometimes my wife would be going out, she's like, "Oh, have a drink," like, I'm like, no, I just can't. It's just such a fear that I have, because of it.
Well, and I truly applaud you for that. I mean, there's so many stories that we hear, whether it's intergenerational trauma or the ability to really break that cycle. For someone, for yourself, to be able to see that and to live that life of sobriety, and to be able to continue down that path, it's nothing but applause and support from my perspective. So then, after that upbringing, then you fast forward, you get into your first marriage, and I know from our conversations that was also a difficult time for you. Maybe could you share a little bit about that experience?
Yeah, I was, at that time, I was 23 years old, and I was in real estate in New York. I was pretty successful, and I met my first wife. She came to visit. She was from Canada. She was from Surrey, actually. She came to visit New York, and we had a mutual friend. So we hooked up and saw each other for that first week, and basically, after talking on the phone for about a month or so, decided that I'm gonna come here to Canada and visit, and we're going to see if we're gonna make this kind of a commitment, because long distance relationships probably not gonna work out. So if we're gonna be serious, we're gonna be serious about it. So I flew to Canada for the first time, and I remember talking to my mother on the phone. My mom at that time she was remarried and living in New Jersey, still drinking heavily, I believe. I wasn't living with her at that time, but I know of her drinking was still pretty bad. And I spoke to her on the phone when I landed in Canada, I remember, and I was very happy because, I thought, maybe there's going to be a very serious relationship that I'm going to, somebody that's probably I'm going to have a future with. And I met my ex-wife's, I met her parents the next day, and a few days later, me and her decided to make an engagement. So we had a pretty wonderful day, and I remember it was evening time, and I got a phone call from New Jersey from her husband, and he told me that my mother killed herself. So I remember when I heard those words for the first time, I did not process them at all. Like I actually, you mean like, because he said your mom died. And I guess it was in Russian, so it was a different way that we talk about it. So it was like, somebody died, and I was like, "You mean my grandma died?" Because I would expected somebody who is more that would make sense. Mm-hmm. But no, he was reassuring me like multiple times it was my mom that passed away. And I remember, and I remember like after that everything became a fog. I don't remember much. I remember my ex-wife got the tickets back to New York. We flew to New York and then drove to New Jersey, and I think it's finally hit me when I got into the house what has happened. And yeah, she had a fight with her husband, got really really drunk, and hung herself on his ties. So yeah, that was and pretty much at that point in my life, I lost basically the only person that I had. Like, I had my grandma, but an elderly lady at that time already. One of them was already in the home, and the other one was about to go in the home. So I really had nobody left.
Well, what a difficult story to tell, and thank you for sharing that. I think listening to your story and seeing you speak about it, it's something obviously that has impacted you. It's something that we hope nobody has to go through. Having gone through it, what was that feeling? What was that sort of next step that you needed to take and realize that to move forward and live your life, it was important for you to do or to move forward? Like, how did you get through that?
Unfortunately, I made a big mistake. I never spoke to anyone. I think the right thing would have been to actually get some counseling. Mm-hmm. Very needed counseling in that moment, but just my culture and being a man and not thinking, being young, I didn't do those steps. What I did was I couldn't face a lot of it. Number one, I couldn't even look at her body. Like, I had an opportunity to see her body. I couldn't do it. And now, many years later, I regret, because I feel like I don't have a closure. I don't have that realization that she passed away. It's always in my head that she's still alive. You know what I mean? Like, it feels like that she just went away and just never came back. But because I never, when I came to the house, her things were still there. Like her, the food that she just cooked was still there. Like, that was very devastating, I think. So I didn't go right about in that way. Didn't get any counseling, and I surrendered myself completely to a person that I barely knew. I let someone else take over completely for me and make all the decisions for me from that moment on. And it took me years, I think, to kind of come out of the haze. I was very badly depressed, and I didn't even realize what I was doing. My ex-wife at that time, my fiance at that time, she just decided to say, okay, well, you have no family left now, so you're gonna move to Canada. I'm packing your bags, and I'm gonna start your immigration process a second time, and that's what happened. And before I knew it, I was living in Abbotsford with absolutely nothing and starting from zero.
Yeah.
I'm losing all my friends, losing all the connections that I have, all the friendships that I made, and coming to a person I barely know into a place I don't know, no access to a vehicle, no driver license even. It was, yeah.
And then at that moment, was that your first experience of then moving into the healthcare profession?
No, it was a few years later. By the time it took the immigration process took again a long time. It took about a year to finally become a landed immigrant in Canada. And then I did a bunch of different jobs, the painting and stuff like that. And then because my ex-wife was a nurse, she said, "Why don't you do something like that? Would you become a nurse?" And I was like, "Yeah, I think I might be good at it." And so I went to school again, and here I am.
And so after that transition, again, having to go through the immigration process, grieving the loss of your mom, also to your grandma and your support systems. What now, looking back during that period of time, do you think would have been, the most useful or beneficial for you, or what do you wish you had during that moment?
I wish I had people to tell me and kind of about counseling. I think I needed counseling. I needed to have tools, proper tools to deal with everything that I was going through. I was not prepared for any of it. Mentally, it could have been so much worse. Thank God I had, it didn't end up, it could have, very bad. I mean, I'm considering myself lucky that even though I had a failed marriage in the end, but at least it wasn't, something way worse,
Absolutely.
But I think when you go through something like this, you definitely need people there for you, to be able to talk to be able to put everything into perspective and help you grieve. You need that grieving process, which I did not have.
And then, let's fast forward through that next period where, you're living with your ex-wife. It wasn't the best relationship for you. What and how did that period of your time end up?
She's not my ex-wife is not a bad person, but I think surrendering myself the way I did, she has a very strong personality that kind of took over our relationship, and just basically, I had no say in anything. It was just her from the beginning of our relationship to the end of our relationship was her way or the highway. And I was, now that I see it, even though there was a lot of mental abuse in that relationship, and anywhere from, I had to ask her for permission to buy a cup of coffee, but there was one point in my realization that my marriage was really failing was, I caught Norwalk virus at work, and I came to work 2 days after catching the virus, and the symptoms start showing at work, and I started feeling really sick. I was feeling I was gonna throw up, and I called my ex-wife, and she's a nurse. She actually worked with me as well. She worked at the same facility with me, right? So I called her and told her, "I'm not feeling well. I think I need to go home." And she's like, "No, you're gonna go throw up in the bathroom and keep working." And I couldn't do it. I was like, after a while, I went to my nurse and I said, "No, I think I need to go home." I went home. I was just in the bathroom constantly throwing up, and she was just yelling at me and making me feel so little, belittling me. And then I remember sitting on the edge of the bed, and my mouth was so dry, and I was asking for a glass of water, and she told me to, "No, you're not getting nothing." I remember falling asleep, waking up, and my mouth dry, and I couldn't even swallow, and I was I sat at the edge of the bed and thinking, this is not where I want to be. This is not the person that I can rely on. This is not the person that if I'm getting older, if I'm gonna need her by my side, when I actually need help, that's not the person that is gonna be there for me.
And what was that impact, having been in a relationship, that wasn't the most supportive for you? What was that like, showing up to work each day, not having the support that you needed, but then also having others rely on you for that support to give them care? How was that impacting your ability to work each day?
It's very hard. I mean, looking back, when you're not happy in your life, and I find that even with, I'm not gonna say everyone, but I say, see it with my coworkers, your personal life greatly affects everything you do. You can be happy-go-lucky, person walking in a room, taking care of a resident when your life is falling all around you. I see people, just crying at work or being, and that affects not only them, but it affects the resident, right? I mean, we all have bad days, but when you're constantly depressed, it's very visible. Mm-hmm. It's very visible to all your coworkers, and all my coworkers knew that I was very unhappy. It was very visible to them,
Yeah, and so then you come to this realization. You realize that it's time to move on. What transpired after that?
I met my best friend. I met my current wife, who is the best thing that can ever happen to me. And I really, like I said, that day when I made, sat at the edge of that bed, I made a conscious choice that I was going to end my marriage. I know I had 2 children with my ex-wife at that time, but I knew that my children is not going to be happy being in this marriage if I'm going to stay just for them. So I made a conscious decision that I'm going to end my marriage. And then, I did. I met my current wife, who has been my best friend and my soulmate, and we've been together for 13 years, and it's been it's like winning a lottery, and that's what I can honestly say as far as my in love. That's what I did. In the end, I did win the lottery.
Yeah, that's truly remarkable, knowing some of the challenges and the struggles that you had to go to as part of your journey to get to where you are today.
Yeah.
And even having her here support you as we're doing this conversation, it's a testament, and I think something that you've worked really hard for and deserve. So I want to just put that out there as well.
Thank you.
This episode is brought to you by the Care for Caregivers peer support line, Care2Speak. Care2Speak is a peer-based phone, text, and web chat service that provides free and confidential support to health and social support workers in BC. For more information on how to connect with us, please visit the show notes below. When it comes to, then you two building a life together, continuing to go to work and advance your career, let's fast forward then to 2019 and... Was it 2019?
It was 2019.
And then another car accident.
Yeah.
So walk us through this experience and what transpired there.
Yeah, we were in Washington State going shopping, and we were on the highway, and we all came to a stop, and we got rear-ended at 100 kilometers an hour by a truck. I was there when it was me, my wife, and my 10-year-old son. And I saw the truck coming. I looked in the rearview mirror and I saw it. I kind of braced for it, which I think was a bad thing to do. And about a day later, all the neurological symptoms kind of kicked in. I had a spinal injury. I had a C4, C5. Basically like an arrow, like my disc got collapsed, and there's a narrowing that the nerve that was coming out of the disc didn't have any room to move, so it was causing a lot of nerve pain and numbness in my left hand. So yeah, that pretty much at that moment ended everything in my life as far as my work. I had to go on disability. And then it started in a long journey of trying to get back and recovery.
Yeah. And going on disability, being able to leverage some of the supports that were in place, what and how did that impact your ability to recover?
So once I got onto disability, I knew, after talking to my doctors and everything else, I knew the only path forward was surgery. I needed surgery, and unfortunately, in Canada, the wait times for something like this, I was looking for about 5 years just to see a neurosurgeon, and then a couple of years after that to even get my surgery. So I, thankfully for the amazing benefits that were provided by my work, and the long-term disability insurance company took everything into their own hands, and were able to provide for me a neurosurgeon so I could get my surgery. They paid privately, so I could get my surgery quicker.
And were there any impacts from a mental health perspective that transpired after this accident?
Yeah, I was in excruciating pain, 24/7, 7 days a week. I couldn't sit down. I couldn't lay down. It was just, if best way to describe it would be having like a toothache in your head, that's constantly aching, and nothing I did was taking it away. I got really low as far as my mood and willingness to go on at that moment. I think as people, we kind of have, we kind of try to concentrate on the future and kind of see what I'm going to do in 2 years, 3 years, we kind of have that. And I found that there was, looking into the future, I only saw suffering. There was nothing there that I could focus on. I just wanted it to end. And I think if I did not have, the surgery wasn't done as fast as it was done, I don't know what I would have done, because I got pretty low. The only thing I think that was keeping me going was my wife had to probably suffer a lot. My kids had to suffer a lot seeing me like this. Just being, I was depressed, like depression from pain. I think a lot of people can understand that. A lot of people, I think that's why they fall into substance abuse and things like that. It was because of the pain. A lot of people have some kind of some kind of injury or something like that. So, and neurological pain, it's indescribable.
And why do you think you had the wherewithal to be able to, not fall into those, coping strategies?
The only thing that I focused on, I started focusing on my kids, my family, and then I started focusing on exercise. I started exercising, and I started. Once I had some kind of a goal, like I knew I'm gonna get that surgery, I started having a hope, and that kept me going. The hope that I will be better. Because I don't think if I had the hope, I don't think I would have made it. I think if I knew that I would be like years waiting and not knowing when I'm gonna have that. Like, the funny thing is, like, the doctor that my family doctor requested for the neurosurgeon still hasn't phoned me, and I already had surgery a few years ago. So I don't know what I would have done. And
so you had that support structure in place. Your family, your wife, your kids.
Yes.
Was there anything else that was helpful for you outside of having that goal, having that drive to help yourself?
Yeah, for me, it was this place that I went to was a Core Fitness. They're kinesiologists that basically they were there for me to kind of train me, and they gave me exercises and things like that that I was able to. It wasn't taking my pain away, but it was helping. Definitely, it was definitely helping.
Mm-hmm.
So, on the mental front, unfortunately, that's another place where I think I didn't get the proper being stubborn man and thinking that I can deal with it on my own. I think that was another mistake that I've made.
So what if there was any, guys or anybody in general just listening to this podcast and maybe struggling themselves, what advice might you give to them or want to share with them?
The biggest thing that I can probably give anyone as men is get help. Yeah. Don't think that you can do this yourself. I was lucky. I'm really saying I'm really lucky that I didn't do something stupid. But I think the most important thing is getting help, being able to talk to somebody. I think even if your family is not good enough, I don't think it's good. It's good to have somebody there that can talk to you, but sometimes you just need a different perspective. Sometimes you need somebody to kind of give you tools to kind of cope with the situation that you're in, and I think that's extremely important. I think it's probably the most important thing that you can do.
Absolutely. And I know we've talked about this before on this podcast, but the sense of hope and the ability to recognize that you're not alone.
Yes.
There's other people who have gone through this, and your story and your journey is an example of that, where there's times where it's going to be really dark and really lonely. But you come through those times and you lean on the people for those supports. So again, I can just applaud you with your being able to stick it out and to live with that hope and to eventually get through that period of time for you.
Thank you. Yeah, it's but as I mentioned, as great as everything in the end turned out for me, it could have been worse. And I'm, looking back, definitely see the mistakes that I've made along the way. And one of the biggest mistakes that I think a lot of men, and I was talking to somebody recently that was telling me we're men, we don't, a lot of times we go through these horrible things, and we don't share it. We just kind of bottle it all inside, and we think that we can deal with it. Oh, we're just gonna put it on the shelf, and I'm gonna deal with it. And I've seen it with my own. I see my coworker. I'm not going to mention any names, but he was going through a lot of problems, a lot of issues, and dealing with death at work constantly, and never bother him. It was never kind of you don't think that it was a big deal. And then one day he just stumbled upon a person that passed away that he didn't expect the person to pass away, and that had a nervous breakdown. It was just something that snapped, and that was it. And he can never work again. And he left work and permanently, because that was it. That was the straw that broke the camel's back at that time.
And do you think, from a work setting perspective, this is something that builds up over time, or is in that specific instance, was it individually isolated moment?
No, it was a build up. It was definitely a build up. It was because I talked to the person, and they are getting mental help. They are getting counseling. But they said it's definitely a build up. It's a build up with everything in their life led them to that moment that normally they would have just okay, well, we're just gonna move on like normal. And at that time, no, it wasn't. They found the body, and that's it. It was just like a boom, snap, nervous breakdown, complete meltdown, and they have to deal with this now.
It's such a difficult experience. Obviously, I can't speak from firsthand experience, but having listened and spoken with many people who have shared the same sentiment that you're talking about, there's a definite need to process, to work through, to grieve. Even being as a healthcare, not necessarily a specific family member of those patients who pass away. So, again, I just want to come back to this idea around what supports are in place for healthcare practitioners. What do you suggest when you're chatting with a colleague who might be struggling? What sort of advice or guidance do you offer those colleagues?
We do have support. We have something that's called family employee assistance. It's basically like counseling. We have like little posters even in the back of the bathrooms. If you're here and you're feeling down, call this number. But not many people are not gonna call that number. Like I only know one person that actually used that number. I would if it was up to me, I think it would be great that we would have almost, that there would be kind of once a month or something like that. There would be somebody there to come into work and offer people personally, maybe, some kind of a guidance or some kind of a, help. Because a lot of times people they're just not gonna do that. They're not gonna initiate those things. They think either from fear of thinking that they're weak, or that they it's just, or what the colleagues think of them, or like people are just usually don't initiate these type of things. A lot of times they just, like I said, they just shelf those problems. And I think maybe even having somebody that once a while that they can come in and offer those, maybe have like an in-service on mental health, and after that saying like, hey, anybody feels this way, after we talked about, we can talk more,
Absolutely. And when I hear your story again, having all those personal experiences of dealing and going through mental illness, and having close family members struggle and ultimately succumb to their illness, and then yourself going through it and having similar thoughts, I gotta ask the question, why are you here today telling your story? What do you hope to accomplish by telling this story?
Well, my biggest thing is if I can reach even one person that is struggling and going through a hard time right now, if they can, just one person, and pick up the phone, call someone, and reach out to someone that they can, that they're not alone.
So if we talk a little bit about yourself and your experience of immigrating from the US to Canada, then starting to work in the healthcare industry, what do you think it's like being an immigrant and coming into the Canadian healthcare system and trying to navigate some of those challenges?
Yeah, I see issues every single day. Like a lot of people don't realize how stressful our jobs are, especially if you're casual. You're an immigrant. Your English is not the greatest. You give an assignment. You have an assignment of, let's say, eight residents that you don't know what they're like. You're coming in the room, you're reading ADLs, and you do not know. ADL might tell you a little bit about it, but you don't know what you're dealing with. And and not only that you have to manage, a lot of people don't realize, you have to manage your assignment. You have to be able to care for these people in a very short amount of time. You also have to deal with physical abuse, and you have to deal with mental abuse. You have to deal with family members that might not like the way you did certain things for their parent. There's a lot of things, and I find it definitely impacts mostly the immigrants in the healthcare industry. Struggling with English and having a different culture is definitely, I find, a big struggle. And I also find, I think, a lot of times, as much as I'm not gonna say anything bad about schooling and how what's lacking, but I also want to emphasize that there's those type of challenges, but challenges people need to realize that our jobs are not, it's not a conveyor belt. We're dealing with human lives, and like I said, there's people that are coming in and dealing with this, but they also kind of focusing on not, getting the job done, and they're not focusing on you dealing with people, that you have to have a approach. You have to know what you're doing.
Yeah, and it's something too that, I've spoken with other healthcare professionals, and they've talked about the challenges of meeting the demands of operational needs and efficiencies within hospitals,
Yes.
but also too on the flip side, being expected to bring a human care or human element
Yes.
to your day-to-day job. So, even notwithstanding the fact that somebody might be an immigrant, but the role itself, how do you struggle, or how do you, go through those challenges and decide, I need to be a little bit more human with this specific situation versus I just got to get the job done.
Yeah, I think that's another part of mental health. You are having to make a really hard choices a lot of times. You're basically looking at a resident, unfortunately, like somebody who is more mentally declined. You begin to prioritize as, okay, this is going to be more on a, has to be done quickly and efficiently, versus somebody who can communicate better. Then you have a bit more of a human approach. And you wish you could have both ways, right? You wish, and I try as much as I can, but I only have a very, very short time to do my morning care and making sure that everything is done, because I don't have unlimited. Even though I'm there for 8 hours a day, I do not have that time, because I have to deal with not only getting them ready for morning care, but you have lunches and breakfast to deal with. So yeah, it's a hard choices that we have to make, unfortunately, and I think that's very unfair, to be given to that to people. I find it pretty difficult.
Absolutely, and I think just listening to your story, understanding how your personal experiences has translated into the type of man who you are, who is able to recognize and have the vulnerability to share your story. Again, I keep coming back to this idea of that's probably one of the biggest strengths that anybody can offer, is to be authentically themselves, to share their lived experience so that others can learn from your story. So I want to thank you for coming on the show today, for telling your story and being that shining light for so many that, they might be in the darkness and are looking for something to grasp onto. So thank you very much for coming today.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thanks for listening to this episode. Be sure to visit the links in the show notes for resources and supports from the Care for Caregivers program. If you're interested in sharing your story on the Care2Listen podcast, please reach out to us at careforcaregivers.ca/podcasts. And don't forget to follow us on your favorite podcast platform to be notified when new episodes are released. Thanks again for joining us, and see you next month.